I want to share with you the research of how you were designed to live out here, to live out in nature, to live in the country. Hey everybody, Chad Cruiser here with Health and Homestead. If you end up liking this video, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, share with your friends. Now, thinking about living in the country, talking about the science of living out in nature, are there actual studies that reveal there are physiological and mental benefits to living in nature? So we're going to start off with the first one, and that has to do with the things that you hear. What do you hear in the city versus what do you hear in the country? So let's start off with a study from the University of Sussex. In this study, participants were to listen to either natural environments or artificial environments. The natural environmental sounds included sounds like wind in the trees. Another environmental sound was a babbling brook. They then did MRI scans of these individuals, looking at their brains, and during the natural sound, the brain had an outward focus. During the artificial sounds, the brain had an inward focus, similar to what is seen in people with depression, anxiety, and PTSD. And what they discovered is that those who at the beginning of the study had the highest levels of stress had the most significant drop in the stress levels during the natural sounds. You see, you basically have two options in life. You're either thinking inwardly, you're thinking about yourself, and when a person thinks about themselves a lot, we consider that self-ish. And strangely enough, depression, when someone's depressed, they typically think a lot about themselves. Not that they're trying to be selfish, I don't mean that at all, but often what happens is that they think about, I'm so bad at this, I'm so terrible at this, and wow, there is a carcass. I don't know if you can see it here. Kind of terrible in my video, but I guess that helps me to be a little more outward focus, not thinking about self. Obviously there was some animal, probably coyote. Yeah, I see their scat there. But so back to our thoughts. You have two options. You either have outward focus or you have inward focus. Notice that the people who were listening to the natural sounds like the wind in the trees or a babbling brook, that they were happier, but those who were listening to kind of maybe city noises end up being more like people who have depression, anxiety, and PTSD. So there's something about being in nature that we were meant to be out here, to hear the silence. If I stop, what do you hear? Absolutely nothing. Maybe a little bit of wind from time to time, although it's still today. But there's something about being in nature that changes, that seems to even rewire the brain to make us simply happier people. Now I want to share with you a massive study. Very few studies have this many people in it. But notice the title of this study. The actual title is Urbanization and Incidence of Psychosis and Depression, a follow-up study of 4.4 million women and men in Sweden. This study was conducted on the entire population of Sweden of those aged 25 to 64. Now Swedes are quite active in nature. And in areas that were the most populated, it increased the chances of someone having psychosis by 68 to 77%, and it increased the chances of someone having depression by 12 to 20%. So what do we see? We see that people who live in the city are much more likely to have psychological problems like psychosis or simply to be depressed just by residing in cities. And the research shows that the more you move toward rural places, the happier you get. We were designed not to be in the urban jungle, but we were designed to be amongst the trees, the forest, out in nature, with the fresh air, with the beauty of the trees all around us, the forests, the rivers, the creeks, the sunshine. We were designed to live here. But thinking about this, are there certain things we can do to actually make ourselves happier if we struggle with depression that are connected with nature? Now, part of the human brain that is operative during what we call rumination. Rumination is that process where you're thinking about something and going over and over and over and over and over maybe the same negative things. And that part of the brain, in the subgenual prefrontal cortex, is operative during that time. So is there anything we can do to calm that down? So here's research on nature versus urban walking and its effect on rumination. It has been shown that rumination is a risk factor for mental illness. A study was reported in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in the United States of America, and they had healthy individuals walk for 90 minutes in either a urban setting or in a natural environment. And what was the result? Those who walked for 90 minutes in a natural setting had a decrease of activity in the subgenual prefrontal cortex and lower levels of rumination. And the same benefit was not seen in those who had an urban walk. You might have first been thinking, okay, well, maybe the people who walked out in nature, they had less stress, less rumination because they were on a walk, and that's kind of stress relieving. And probably walks are to a degree, but those who walked in the urban setting did not have the same lowering of activity in the subgenual prefrontal cortex, meaning they were more likely to have that portion of the brain that exhibits rumination still active, but that can be lowered by simply spending time in nature. So one thing we can do if we struggle with going over and over the same negative thoughts is we can, well, do what I'm doing right now. Get outside in nature. And we're going to find out, especially if you get rid of your cell phone while you're out there. But is there anything else we can do to benefit our levels of stress? Check out this study. Here's a study on students who were sent into a forest for 2 nights. They discovered that students who spent time in nature had lower levels of cortisol than students in the city. Another study showed that students in nature had lower levels of heart rate, so it actually lowered their heart rate and lowered their levels of cortisol. You might be saying, great, it lowers levels of cortisol. What on earth is that? Well, it's actually a stress hormone. So what they found is that young people who spend time, and I'm sure it's for people of all ages, but young people who go camping in nature simply lower levels of their stress hormones, and even their heart rate becomes more calm and regular. So simple things we can do are go for a walk, go spend time in nature. Maybe you need to get away and even go camping. Whatever it is you can do to get out in nature. Another thing that gives some evidence that we were meant to spend time in nature is even the healing process of our bodies. So not only is spending time in nature mentally healing our minds, but it actually may hasten the healing of our physical bodies. You may have heard of the study done in the 1970s by Dr. Ulrich, who what he did was he began to notice, he just observed, and then he actually put it to the test, but first he simply observed that his patients who had a view of outside into kind of a natural landscape, that he thought, man, they seem to be healing faster and doing better than the patients who had surgery yet had looked out on maybe a brick wall through their window. And so they thought, well, that's a hypothesis. Maybe it is the case. So we put it to the test, and guess what? It was true. They actually would get out of the hospital like a day earlier. The people who were looking out on nature, they would have maybe, I think it was like a quarter of the amount of the analgesic medication, the pain relieving medication. And so now think of how much money you could save, 1 day less in the hospital and a quarter of the amount of pain meds. I mean, you realize how much people's lives could be benefited financially and physically by even having hospitals have natural views outside of their windows. So you say, okay, Chad, that was back in the 70s. Now, has any new research been done on it? Actually, yes, there has. Here's a study on clinical rehabilitation on health benefits of a view of nature through the window. This was a study of 278 coronary and pulmonary patients, provided data at all measurement points during the program. So what they had was 2 different options. The patients were either put into rooms with a panoramic view of nature, and the other group had to have a window that was basically, the view was blocked or partially blocked by buildings. What did they end up finding? It says right here where it says results. For women, a blocked view appeared to negatively influence change in physical health, whereas for men, a blocked view appeared to negatively influence change in mental health. So looking out the window, the patients could either be happier simply looking out on a natural landscape, or they could actually be healthier, depending on if they were a man or a woman, as far as the study went. So to me, this just gives evidence that we were designed to be out in nature, that we were designed to be amongst the trees, in the forest, by the rivers, in the quiet. We're 24 hours a day. We don't have the sound of traffic and cars and horns and all these kinds of things, but we have time to be away. So what can you do if you're someone who, you say, well, I live in the city, I can't just move into the country tomorrow? No, you probably can't. But what you can do is, one study found that people who spent time on a weekly basis, who spent time one day each week, lowered their levels of stress for an entire week. So you may not be able to be outside in nature every day. You may not live, right next to the national forest like I do. But you can actually choose to spend time in nature. If you can spend time on a weekly basis, you will actually make yourself happier for the next week. So I would challenge you. If you can't get way out into the country, at least go by a park, go out into nature, find some time away so that you can find the mental and physiological benefits of spending time in nature. By the way, if you like this video, you'd like to learn more about nature and health and scientific studies on the benefits of either spending time in nature or natural remedies for things like diabetes, heart disease, various things that we look at, the actual scientific journals, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, share it with a friend. God bless and have a fantastic day.